Okay, first of all, everyone, please do take your seats because we are now starting. Thank you, of course, to everyone who is in the room and everyone who's joining us online. Always a pleasure to have everyone here. Today, we're going to be discussing in our first panel this afternoon a pharma strategy to foster Europe's competitiveness on a global scale. But is this prescription for innovation, this new pharma strategy, the right medicine for Europe? The EU, of course, outlined its pharma package to make the bloc a hub for medical innovation. The legislation is allegedly meant to be the jewel in the crown of a much-vaunted European health union. Goals include supporting industry, improving R&D, technology, unlocking, which is very important to the everyday European, equitable access to safe and effective medicines while boosting the attractiveness of the EU to the pharmaceutical industry. But rules and regulations, as we all know, they only go so far. So does Europe have the right environment and infrastructure across its member states? In a nutshell, you could say the pandemic answered that question, no. COVID-19 did, though, magnify the fragility of healthcare to meet the basic needs of everyday people. So can this shiny pharma package really help address vulnerabilities in supply chains? Slow approval of new medicines, workforce depletion, budget constraints, and should we go on and on? We could, but here's also another question. How can industry deliver on innovation when research and development and clinical trials are, of course, on the decline in Europe? So these are just a few questions to highlight for the panelists. Now, over the next hour and 15 minutes, you're going to be hearing the thoughts of all of our assembled panelists. It's nice to see so many women. Only one man, he's in the minority. Brilliant. There will also be time for audience questions. I know that some of you do want to ask lots of questions, so please do have your questions ready. So, just in terms of semantics, we'll have this first panel that's looking at Europe's place in the world in light of the new pharma strategy with a focus on competition. We will have a short break of about 15 minutes for everyone to have their coffee, so do load up. The fireside chat that was meant to be with Austria's Labour and Economy Minister isn't taking place. Unfortunately, he is busy, but he has sent a video, and that video will be shown in panel 2, the final panel of the EHS today, which will focus on the very important aspect of patient perspective and how access that has been spurred on by innovation can help everyone. So there's a lot to get through. Let's get started. Time to introduce our assembled panelists. First of all, we have Nathalie Moll. She's the Director General at EFPIA, the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations. Welcome. Good to see you again. We have Pernille, Weiss, the MEP, and importantly, the Rapporteur of the Pharma Directive. Now, just to let everyone know, I'm sure everyone knows you because you're all obviously health experts. She's the author of the draft report for the directive. There was also another author for the regulation. Then we have Anca Toma. She's the Executive Director at the European Patients Forum. Great to have the patient perspective on our panel. We have Massimo, Giorgio Visentin from Pfizer's Eastern European Cluster President. Last but not least, over at the end, you might need to shout. Kidding. We have Francesca Colombo. She's the Head of Health Division at the OECD. So it's great to have all of you here. Always awesome to have an almost fully female panel. Sorry. Now I'll give the panelists time to speak and to introduce themselves to all of you lovely audience. I want to say also, keep it snappy, because obviously there is quite a number of you. And if anyone wants to talk to the questions that I raised in my introduction, feel free. But first, I'll go to Nathalie.
Thank you so much. And great to be here this afternoon, especially because already on this panel, we have those who should be involved in this conversation. So this is a great moment because it's not once in a generation. I've done this before. The legislation has, about 20 years ago, we were writing some of those pieces of legislation, but it is the moment where the Europe of 27 gets to decide what its future looks like, and the flag is just waving there, by the way, at us, the European flag. Do we want a Europe that is incredibly resilient and exporting innovation like we did during COVID, where we were the vaccine producers for the world from day one, which was really impressive and I felt incredibly proud about? Or do we want to neglect that and continue to lose the race and competitiveness that we are already losing at the moment against the US and China? So, Europe in the last 20 years has lost 25% of global investment in R&D, which means we're not that sexy anymore, to the US and China increasingly.
Were you ever sexy,
trials, well, on clinical trials, we also seem to be falling behind, which is important not just for science, but also for patients. That's their first access to medicines. So this is really, I think everybody's looking at this revision to see, will it turn out to be what makes us, puts us on the front foot again, what makes us predictable, what makes us interesting, what makes us sexy to investors and to industry, and at the end of the day, what makes us able to deliver to patients, not just in Europe and the rest of the world. So I'm really excited to discuss it, but I'm even more excited to be part of the whole development together with other stakeholders, because it's the only way to get it right is together, I think. So thank you.
Nicely said. Next to our MEP, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for being here today, and thank you for inviting me. Hopefully there will be many events like this where we will have the opportunity to talk not only about pharma legislation, but about health as a very complex molecule that it is, consisting of a lot of different sizes and colors of atoms that are changing all the time. Individually, but also as a reflection and a reaction of what else goes on in that molecule. I'm educated by nature, as my first, not by nature, almost by nature, because my grandmother was a nurse, my mother was a nurse, I became also a nurse and worked as a nurse, and also on the sideline as a part-time health politician back home in my little country, Denmark. I hold a master's degree in health science, then seeing much more complexity that I saw as a clinician. And I also have a master's degree in innovation and leadership. And somehow I hope that these competences and the experience that I have gained over the years, now also being a member of the parliament, can make me not only contribute with making good legislation, but also to facilitate the very difficult conversation about healthcare that is in Europe, because we both have the local level authorities, we have municipalities who in my country has a lot to do with healthcare and social services. We have national member states who has a different point of view than we have in the European Parliament. But in the European Parliament, we make legislation that hits everybody. And I agree very much on the objectives put out in the proposal from the Commission on the Pharma package, as well also echoed by Nathalie just before. But I do really also hold a very strong hope that we, during the period of time that we work on the legislation, that we can inform citizens, not only patients, but citizens, families, other adjacent industries, on the complexity of what makes us as citizens, no matter how many diseases, how many symptoms, how many diagnoses we will, by the end of a very long, hopefully happy life, die with, not because of, that we can also create a stronger, more sustainable conversation in Europe about how to be alive and have a quality life while we are doing it. Because we address right now a lot of challenges, we see a lot of inequalities that maybe should be understood as more than just an inequality, but also a hint about how different member states and societies deal with healthcare. So maybe we can also turn this conversation to something that learns us how to navigate in a modern society where challenges will always be there, and there will therefore always be an ask for how we can do things better. We will need investments and strong industries to grow the economy within the sector itself, but also to nurture the effect that that will create on a more horizontal level. So I hope also to learn to listen and to take with me after this afternoon some new ideas on how I can sprinkle the very hard discussions that we will have for the next months ahead, and maybe even years ahead before the Pharma package is finally concluded. By the end of that period, I do really hope that no matter if you are a part of the industry, or you are a researcher, or you are in a family with rare diseases, that you know we did the best we ever could in Europe. We have a legal framework that makes us agile and innovative and able to act in the moment, giving that this year will also not bring the perfect Europe to the table and then that will stay like that forever on. It will be a continuous challenge for us to work with that. So I welcome that very much.
Thank you so much. Massimo next.
Thank you. So thank you first of all for having invited me to this incredible panel. So I guess my presence here is about, try to work together on how to solve what are the major challenges that we have in front of us as we speak. I think that there are two main challenges that all state members as well as the European Parliament and Commissions have to try to solve together is really around about equality and access of medicines. I think that this is by far the most important element. We're in a situation where unfortunately we're not there yet. It's something that is known since years, if not decades. However, after such a challenging period like the pandemic one, I think that is now the right moment to execute accordingly. And the second element is around about, how can we make Europe a competitive place in terms of attract investment, have the investment coming over into Europe more than it has happened in the past years. I think that we saw a changing trend in the past year as far as R&D is concerned. We're more or less collecting 40% plus of the investment between US, Europe, Japan, and China. Now we're attracting only 30%. So there's a major drop in the investment, so we should ask ourselves why. So countries, as well as state members, as well as commissioners have a role here to solve those issues. And those issues are critical to me in this moment of time because unfortunately we have been seeing some backdrop in the cost containment programs that countries have put together in the recent weeks and months. Clearly there are some challenges from a financial point of view in the governments to deal with, for example, the inflation that is creating a lot of, again, challenges to the budget of the countries, but unfortunately I think that the problem is that short-term objectives are taking over from long-term objectives. And the long-term objectives, to me, are clear. What I mentioned earlier, access and make this part of the world attractive from a competitive point of view. I hope that this is going to be the core of this conversation, and different parties, industry, stakeholders coming from countries as well from the European Commission are the people that have to talk and they have to take care of that.
Okay, thank you so much. Next, over to Anca.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. The reason we're here is because the revision of the pharmaceutical legislation and in general the pharma strategy beyond this legislation also in other policy areas, it is an opportunity to ensure that policies meet the needs of those who need medicines, and that is patients. Firstly, because it is an opportunity to define innovation in terms that matter to patients, and that is about bringing real, concrete benefits to patients, whether it is for new medicines or for older medicines that are being rediscovered and repurposed. This also includes ensuring that the needs of patients, the unmet needs of patients, are being taken into account in defining what innovative means. Secondly, it is an opportunity to create an enabling environment for competitiveness which goes beyond incentives for R&D, but also the other side of it, the bureaucracy, eliminating bureaucracy, ensuring more resilience or supporting more resilient supply chains, but also faster regulatory approvals, and the very, very dear item to me, which is the democratic involvement of patients in healthcare system decision making, but also in the development process, because we know, and there's significant evidence to that patient involvement in developing medicines, but also in regulatory and in healthcare decisions improve not only the quality of products and of services, but also the outcomes for patients. And I think we can all agree that that is an objective worth pursuing. And then finally, and I know we're not necessarily here to talk about that, and there will be a panel on the patient perspective later on where I'm sure you will hear it again. I think innovation is all nice and good, but it has to get to patients. So we must talk about innovation together with access. And that is a more political conversation where member states need to be involved, and member states need to be made aware that their decisions have a huge impact on the life of people within, but also beyond their borders. So I'll stop here.
Okay, thank you so much, Francesca.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. A few initial considerations. I'm Francesca, I'm from the OECD, head of the Health Division. The first one is that I think there is a golden opportunity really more broadly in Europe with a number of reforms, packages, and changes which are happening. And this really gives, for those of us who have been in health for quite some years, really an opportunity to have this Europe for health, or health for Europe in a way that I think it's definitely a golden opportunity to look at. And it should be considered in that more broader considerations of, yes, the package for pharma, but also how does this relate to some of the other changes and reforms which are being made. I think there is a risk, however, sometimes to think very much of Europe, Europe, Europe in isolations from a bit the more global and broader international perspective. And when we're talking about issues related to medical supply chains and pharmaceuticals products, obviously, and markets, those are global markets. And I think it's quite important that we don't lose track of how those products are inserted within more global markets, how are the needs also different parts of the world, how do we reconcile some more global objectives with regional and also national objectives. I think it's a tension which is not easy to reconcile always, but I think it's quite important in looking at the reform of the pharmaceutical package to bear in mind also those broader global considerations. And I think we have seen it very much during COVID that tensions obviously come up. But if we look at one issue also in relation to the supply chains, the problems in the functioning of medical supply chains were actually pre-existing COVID. And with COVID, we have seen additional issues that come up. I mean, pre-existing COVID, there were things that were related to quality aspects in the production and manufacturing, or price and commercial incentives, or issues related to concentrations. During the COVID pandemic, we saw other dimensions related to the misfunctioning of trade. With restrictions and bans on exports, and that didn't make the trade system function as it would normally. And I think those more also broader considerations that relate to trade and how that functions and how that can facilitate having smooth medical supply chains, but how do we make sure that these are not disrupted within and beyond Europe? It's quite important to consider. Lastly, when looking at the pharmaceutical medical package, there are many, many different goals and objectives that need to be achieved, and some of them can be, I would not say in competition, but there can be some tension between them. Access obviously is a fundamental, objectives. We heard the industry obviously talks about competitiveness. There is the issue also of what type of innovation do we get? Is it the innovation about the right things, or do we get a lot of medical needs, which actually where there is very little incentives for innovations? And it's sometimes very difficult to reconcile all of those objectives.
So let me pick up on that then. You call this a golden opportunity for the EU, but you also said it's a risk to see Europe in isolation. So before we get to our rapporteur, do you think this legislation is not seeing the bigger picture?
No, I think it does see the bigger picture. And as I said, I think it's a golden opportunity. But we are very much at the beginning, and a lot will depend also on the actual details and implementations. So it's more in that respect. It's like when looking at moving forwards with the legislations, I think it's important to consider always that big picture in mind. But I'm not saying that it does not consider those aspects. Yeah.
So everything, the devil is in the details, as they say. So MFU Weiss, talk us through the approach of the European Parliament then. There is a divergence between what the European Commission proposes and obviously whenever it comes to legislation and when the European Parliament has to make its draft reports, we know obviously there are changes and differences, but there does seem to be specific divergences, especially on something that I think has become a bit contentious, regulatory data protection. So talk us through the European Parliament approach.
Well, we are in the beginning of a shadow negotiation now, and when I see go through all the amendments on RDP, I see that despite what some superficial journalists could conclude, namely that the more to the right, the longer the RDP, and then vice versa in the other direction, I see that there is an understanding more broadly that RDP is one of the most concrete tools for us to foster more innovation and to keep more investments in Europe. And I'm very happy to see that as the rapporteur, because then there is the possibility for some kind of common ground that if we really agree in the intentions that everybody has articulated, namely that this year is about having more innovation of more medicines that we have on the table at the moment, but also in ways where the economy grows in Europe, that will actually be a part of the availability and accessibility, because by the end of the day, every member state decides themselves whether or not they would like to make an agreement on pricing and reimbursement. So we also need the economy from the pharma sector to grow in ways that makes the possibility to actually buy medicines that today is not available in some member states and is there creating some very clear observations of inequality that is not because of the length of the RDP, but the way that healthcare systems in member states are dealing with the possibilities that they have to make both economy grow, but also to make good contracts buying in medicines for their citizens, but also to see medicine as a part of the healthcare system. I mean, we know that there are other treatments besides from medicine that to deal with the diagnoses and symptoms and patient groups, and we have to see more holistically also. So what I see now is the fact that we have an election coming up, and that will create some kind of both hot potatoes on the table that someone either would like to address some issues that is popular in the election campaign. What I am concerned about is, of course, that by the end of the day, we shouldn't destroy this golden opportunity to really redesign the pharma legislative package in Europe so that it lasts also after the election.
So you think that these superficial journalists have just picked up on hot potato being RDP?
That is one of the narratives that has been and will be, of course.
But why did you want to change the European Commission's rules on this then?
Oh, because there is a fundamental mistake in the Commission's proposal, where they say that the RDP depends on whether you, as a market authorization holder, as a company, can make your product available in all 27 member states, as if it is in the hands of the industries themselves. It is not. And to be honest, and that may be a harsh way to say it, it's a little bit an insult to the treaty and to the fact that there is, to a great extent, sovereignty, boundaries for how much the Commission can do to force what member states must do with their budgets on healthcare. I mean, it takes two to a tango. It also takes two to make an agreement on pricing and reimbursement. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I'm then doing is turning it into the more right way to incentivize for accessibility, namely that the market authorization holders, when they have a product, they must, of course, go into negotiation with whoever member state says that they would like to make a contract, not to force the industry to force the member state to make an agreement, because you can't force someone to a tango that they don't want to participate in, so to speak.
And obviously, if they can't dance as well.
Yeah, but that's also something that I addressed, that I wanted to be made in a more easy way, both for the market authorization holders, but of course also for the member states, that it gets easier to learn to make the dance. And if they along the way find out, okay, we are not doing the dance, they don't blame each other for why do we not do it. So there is also this facilitation proposal in my proposal, that for member states that are maybe not so trained in doing these parts of their healthcare obligations or, to their citizens, there are help to get.
Okay. Now, before I move on to Nathalie, because I know that she definitely wants to comment on what you've just spoken about, the last, you could say, superficial journalist question that I picked up online, some have said that the draft directive is favourable to the industry, but the draft regulation imposes more obligations, so it's more of a mixed bag that may not lead to any competition. Would you agree or disagree?
No. Well, again, sometimes I think, and not to offend any journalist, I have a daughter who's a journalist, so I offend her first and not you secondly, that we are living in a time. I'm glad she gets the worst of it. We are living in a time right now where the speed in the news picture goes so fast, and everything about what is delicious in a click equation. And not to go in depth and really present what is in the proposal from the Rapporteur on the regulation and in the directive that has both sweets and salty nuts for both member states and for market authorization holders. There are both. I have also in my proposal something that I know there are stakeholders in the industry that they don't like, as well as also I can see that there is in the regulation something that, yeah, I could have drafted that myself. The situation, of course, is that Timo Wölken is a socialist. I mean, no wonder that something that he highlights is echoing what kind of political family he is representing, as well as also me. I mean, thank God that there are still some differences in the political picture, because otherwise there will be nothing to vote against whether or not by the end of the day. So I'm not so surprised, but I'm more surprised, and not surprised, but I'm sad that we are living in this very fast news period in time where this piece of legislation really needs some clever and in-depth journalists who dig a little bit more deeper into the details and the equations.
Well, hopefully that's what we're doing here at the European Health Summit. Okay, so Nathalie, your thoughts then. So the quote that I've read from EFPIA is that if the EU pharma legislation goes ahead in its current form, Europe will be set to lose a third of its R&D by 2040. And that would cost Europe €2 billion a year. Why would the EU set out to create a 2 billion hole? And also, anything else you want to reply to our MEP?
Yeah, so that's a good question that we've been asking ourselves as well. I think the issue was there was never a competitiveness check done on the legislation. So there was an impact assessment on how much it would cost the innovative industry, how much the generic industry would make and member states would save, but we never had a competitiveness check. And that ecosystem that created vaccines here, that wasn't just the industry. There's a whole ecosystem behind that, from researchers, universities, research centers, SMEs, spin-offs, technology transfer offices, clinical trials. That's a whole ecosystem that will be impacted by this legislation, whichever way it goes. And so you need to do a competitiveness check. So we ran our own while we wait for perhaps the Commission institutions to do theirs. And when we ran that competitiveness check, we looked at the whole ecosystem. And what we saw were those figures. So for an industry that provides 172 billion euros a year to the trade balance in Europe, the most positive contributor to the trade balance, and 42 billion in research and development a year, you would lose 2 of those 42 billion. So instead of increasing, which is what we're doing every year, you'd be decreasing. That's for member states. You'd lose a further third of the R&D investment. So I said we lost a fourth. We're going to add a third. If you're good at maths, then you can get to that. It doesn't look good in any way. And the point is, what was the objective? So going back, and somebody in a recent conversation, a politician said, who's going to have the courage to say, how do we solve the different issues? So legislation is about safety, quality, efficacy of medicines, and incentives, unmet medical need, how to help make sure that we develop innovation and that in a fair way. Access is a shared responsibility among all the players in this wonderfully complex region that we find ourselves, Europe. And it takes more than a piece of European legislation to fix member state access because of subsidiarity, because of the complexity. So when are we going to take the responsibility, each of those actors, to either do something on our own, which I don't think is going to be very smart because access is a chain, right? And you have the patient and then, or to sit around a table and discuss what are the problems, the different problems. Do we agree? Okay, let's say there are these 5 problems. Who's going to do what? And I know that Massimo will talk a bit about what industry has done in the meantime, since we can't get the roundtable discussion. We've done our own thing. We've stepped up. We've analyzed what the problems are and done something about it. But again, alone, we're not managing to fix that issue because we're not the only responsible, as Pernille just said, of access decisions. So for us, I think the risk is a lose-lose-lose rather than a win-win-win. And I know that my president this morning was live on the screen calling for the future politicians and whoever comes in next year to have at the heart of their campaign a European strategy industrial strategy for health. Because there's a value that this industry brings in terms of economy, but there's a bigger value that it brings in terms of solutions for patients. And in this moment where the geopolitical world is not as, our friends, are they friends, are they not friends? We're even in a different place than we were during COVID. So we need to be able to produce that innovation, to sustain that ecosystem, and to stop that trend and reverse it. We have the tools. I think we also have the willingness. We just need the right places to discuss and the right solutions to make it happen.
Okay, so Massimo then, Nathalie teed you up. Talk to us then about what industry has been doing in the meantime. And then also, just to also pick up on what Nathalie just said there, that health essentially isn't being seen as added value, you could say, to the economy, is it?
Yeah, so let me start a little bit about, this inequity around access, because for me is definitely the most important element that we need to tackle all together. I think that there is evidence. There is, I don't know if you are familiar with the weight indicator, that basically is the time to get access to innovative therapies, that shows that we have a huge inequity across Europe. It's like if you are lucky and you are born or you live in the northwest of Europe, you get access much earlier and easier than in the south and the east part of Europe. And when we're talking easier, we're talking about 10 times quicker. And innovation, by definition, has a value only if is on time in the hands of the patients. There is no innovation that can come 10 years after. Innovation is over. So time of innovation is a critical success factor. And back to the comment that Nathalie made, a lot of this is in the hands of the countries, of the state members. So there is a call to actions to the countries to work together and find a solution to make this access finally solved. This is an issue that we had before, but we continue having. And we saw that is solvable because throughout the pandemic, we saw that when vaccines got approved at the European level, 2 days after it was available in the countries. So it's not as impossible. Now we have a fact. It's a fact, and therefore we need to understand why we cannot make it every day. From that point of view, from an industry point of view, we have a lot of, first of all, we are here because we want to demonstrate that we are a partner. We don't leave you alone. It's a common goal Only a common goal can be solved. Complex goals can be solved only together. Cannot be solved by one or another party. As industry, we are open to evaluate several opportunities. We are open to evaluate outcome-based negotiation that could speed up the price reimbursement. We are absolutely happy to introduce some different in terms of pricing depending on the countries. Because if you are in European region, you need to understand that there are some countries that have less than others. We cannot ignore that. And to do that, we need to be willing to have different, tiered pricing across the country. With examples, if you look back at the pandemic, the way vaccines were priced, took that into account. For example, if I talk about Pfizer specifically, we have a program that is called Accord for a Healthier World that basically makes available innovative medicine and vaccines that are currently available in the US and the European countries outside of those two regions at a non-profit price. Clearly, we're talking about the low-income countries. We're talking about 42 countries, and we're talking about 1.2 billion people who could have access to this type of drug. So as far as the industry is concerned, we're doing a lot. We're also willing to have some voluntary commitment to file all the medicines once approved by EMA within 2 years across all countries. Clearly, we cannot commit more because it's something that depends on the country. So from a pharmaceutical point of view, from an industry point of view, we are definitely willing to partner. But there is a call to action to understand in each of the countries where are the barriers, why there are delays, what are replicating twice, 3, 4 times. And what is even worse is that I mentioned differences across people depending if they are born in the Northwest or Southeast. What is even more shocking is that differences that are within single countries. There is this trend in all countries, all European countries, to go for a regionalization of the budget because of the accountability of responsibility for a single province or region, but this is going to create a further differentiation across people, depending where they live and where they're born. This, again, not absolutely acceptable. It's something that time is over. An example throughout COVID demonstrated that it's possible. It's very hard to understand why we're not able to solve something that is about human beings. It's about us. It's not about anything else. Time is crucial, and let's not forget that all of us, by having a healthier life, we can produce more. We saw during the COVID period what was the level of our GDP.
Let me ask you this then. So do you think that the ambition that pharmaceuticals like yourself, who developed all of these vaccines for us during COVID, do you think that ambition isn't translating now? It's just sort of deflated?
Yeah, I think we don't see the maximization of that opportunity. I think that,
and are you seeing that in in this proposal as well, this pharma package? Are you seeing that ambition there?
I see the ambitions, the idea. I share the goal, but honestly, I don't see in the package the right tools. I mean, it's very simple. When you want to accelerate a given industry, you put incentives, right? I'm not talking about the pharma. I'm talking any industry. You put incentives to the industry to grow more. The package has some restrictions, and the restrictions, by definitions, are not gonna bring to the next level the industry and the attractiveness and therefore access. So again, we share the goal, but we don't share the tools. That is really about regulatory data protection, or that is about orphan exclusivity. These are against because they reduce the incentivation, the innovation, because they reduce the attractiveness of the industry.
Okay, so Anca, let me come to you then. I mean, we're hearing a lot about incentives, competition, you know, what could be right, what could be better with this new proposed legislation. But from your perspective then, I mean, if we go back to the pandemic, we know what happened. We saw how badly the healthcare systems were affected by everything, and of course, patients. From what you've heard so far, we know, obviously, we're here to discuss competition, but do you think healthcare is only seen as a critical investment when things are critical? Or we should say, during a crisis, that's when healthcare is only the critical investment to be made?
I think health is kind of like the ugly duckling of human rights. We only notice it when it quacks.
Okay.
So
well, it definitely quacked during the pandemic,
pardon
sadly.
my analogy. I think, yes, health should not, honestly, we're on the verge of wasting a good crisis and losing that opportunity. Now, the fundamental problem that we have is health was at the very top of citizens' priorities before the pandemic, and it remains at the very top of citizens' priorities now. Any poll about what Europeans care about will have health at the very top. And I think we, as a European society, we need to make that strategic political decision as to whether we are going to consider health in economic terms, and then we should treat it as such, or if we are going to consider health as a fundamental human right that transcends these discussions, at least at the level of the objectives we seek. Now, of course, everything has a cost. I'm not naive, right? Everything has a cost, but it's also a question of the values that we're pursuing. And again, incentives are all nice and good, and regulations are all nice and good, and prices and negotiations and innovation are all nice and good if they reach the people they're supposed to reach, and they do for those people what they're supposed to be doing. That's why, you know, when we talk about healthcare, what patients see is really access, and that's this is what we see at the end of it. So access is availability, accessibility, affordability, also appropriateness and adequacy. People have to have the right medicines at the right healthcare. We're talking here about medicines, but you know, healthcare is about so much more. It's about having the right healthcare for the right people at the right time, and you know, ideally at the right cost as well for the healthcare system. So yes, it is a bit of a shame that we remember health when it's in danger. And I am a bit alarmed at how we're really about to lose the learnings of the pandemic. I don't want to minimize what has been achieved, because we've learned about a lot of things that can be done. Europe acting together was obvious. I mean, we got out of the pandemic thanks to Europe acting together with patients, with industry, with all stakeholders. And that got us out of a pandemic. And we mustn't forget that. But what are we going to learn from it? Are we going to learn that we have to go back to 27 member states, or are we going to learn that we can act together?
Interesting. Nathalie, let me ask you then, does industry understand values?
I think what Massimo was explaining was that we understand it so much that we couldn't just sit back and wait for the conversation anymore. And, you know, the companies were acting individually until 4 years ago, you know, weight indicator year, it's 10 years of publishing the weight indicator. We're like, okay, these numbers are alarming, let's publish why. So we went in to study why 1 year, and then the year after, and then the year after again, just to check if the reasons were always the same 10 reasons. And after you've done that 3 times, you can't just sit and say, can we have a discussion? And nobody wants that discussion. Okay, fine, we'll do our things. We'll do our commitment to file in all member states within 2 years. We'll measure that commitment online. We'll show the results every 6 months, because the commitment's just words. So we will do our bit, and that's how much we believe in values, because as Massimo said, in innovation, or even Anca, she said, I mean, unless the product reaches the patient on time, it was never important for that patient to begin with. So I think the values are very clear, the motivation is very clear, but the joint work is not there yet. And we had to do it in COVID. We had weekly calls every Friday morning with all the stakeholders, called in by the Commission to work out green lanes and clinical trial guidelines. Every Friday we had a call, and every Monday there was a solution. It was amazing. 12 weeks, not 2 weeks, 12 weeks. And suddenly we don't sit around the table and talk about access anymore. Why? Yeah. Why is that?
And that sort of echoes what MPP Weiss and Massimo were talking about. I want to come to one issue of, before we go to the audience, so audience, I hope you're ready for your questions, wanted to just check in with Francesca on supply chains. I mean, do you think this regulation and directive, the package itself, has it found the right sort of carrot and stick when it comes to improving the supply chain issues? And if you also could also just highlight the role of the EMA, so the European Medicines Agencies, under this reform. I understand the proposal, it's going to be 180 days, not 210 days to review files. The European Commission will then have 46 days to complete their formalities. So is it getting it right on the supply chain issue?
It's always very difficult to get. I mean, it's definitely in the right direction, and I should say that obviously, I mean, we are in OECD, we don't just look at EU countries, so it's much broader, so I'm not into the nitty-gritty of all the regulation, and I think I should mention that. But we are doing quite a lot of work on medical supply chains because of the disruptions that we have seen during COVID-19, but because also of pre-existing weaknesses that were there even before the pandemic, linked to some of the issues I mentioned, in some cases, market-related and prices, or quality-related, or linked to concentrations of certain products in particular segments. And the proposals which are on the tables and what is going to be implemented in the EU, it's very much aligned with the sets of directions which other countries outside of Europe are also thinking of, and the sets of, if you want, recommendations that ourselves are making. So is it the right mix of measures? It certainly goes in that directions. It places a lot of emphasis on something which is critical, which is about the, if you want, the visibility, the information that we have, the understanding and the data that we have on the supply chains. There's been a reinforcement of the shortage notifications in terms of standardizing more, in terms of requiring information, enhanced role for the EMA and also for the HERE, as a matter of fact, for medical countermeasures. There are possibilities for enhancing more joint procurement, but also making sure that when there are joint procurements, there are other criteria which are taken into considerations, not just prices. If you want to have availability, obviously you need to take that into consideration. So definitely it's a mix of different carrots and sticks, but also information related that go in the right direction. Now we'll need to see it in practice. And there are two different things that need to be seen. One, whether it works in times of extreme crisis. Hopefully there will not be one next. But also how it works in normal situations. And here we're talking about two slightly different things. There are issues related to medical supply chains disruptions, which occur, on a regular basis. Shortage notifications had increased by 60% in OECD countries in the 2 years before the pandemic. So there was an issue related out there and relates just to normal functioning and root causes that must be addressed. And then how the system could function in a situation of extreme crisis that does require some additional, also international cooperation measures and added tools to face. But I'm quite hopeful that definitely goes in the right directions. Then, we'll see it in practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
And before we go to the audience, Massimo, any thoughts on supply chain issues?
I mean, from an industry point of view, I think that the common denominator is really about, all companies are trying to have, multiple suppliers. We're not going to be stuck to a single supplier because you never know what is going to happen. I think that what Francesca said is about, we need to be more flexible from a trade point of view. I think that, I mean, if you stick to a single geography where the production and consumption should happen in the same place, I think that you're going to be limiting a lot yourself. Clearly, the companies are also trying to have a lot of flexibility between, for example, as far as Pfizer is concerned, US and Europe, in terms of, I mean, supply chain. And in general, I think that there is also a request of a proper behavior from the countries, countries that are ordering drugs. I think that stockpiling, for example, are creating an unrealistic trend of consumption that is going to completely create an issue in terms of forecasting, because everything goes along with a good forecasting process. So these are the key elements that I think that we are working on. Actually, we have already implemented. And back to what the company, the Pfizer, has done in the past, I think that we've even taken, the production at risk at the time when we had a pandemic, just to demonstrate that for us, the priority is really bring a given medicine or a given vaccine to the hands of the patients when is the right moment.
Okay, well said. Okay, audience, who's got a question? Oh, yeah, please go ahead, lady in the front.
Thank you. Sarah Garner from WHO Euro, Senior Policy Advisor for Medicines. I just want to support the discussions about collaboration and the need for collaboration and the potential benefits. We've launched the WHO Access to Novel Medicines platform, which through the participants on the panel are stakeholders in that. And just to illustrate, yesterday we have a very fruitful discussion in Brussels hosted by the Belgians about the indicators which were mentioned and the number of indicator systems that are available in the EU and the willingness of the stakeholders to work together to get a better index that looks at all perspectives. So I guess my question is around WHO Euro is there as a partner to support those discussions, to work with member states. It's the same member states. What are the key priorities for that collaborative discussion?
Who would you like to answer the question?
I guess I'll start with Nathalie, maybe, and then go to Anca.
Okay, so Nathalie then Anca.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And you know, it's really wonderful that since we couldn't get a European discussion, we got a WHO one. To be quite honest, I mean, this is what we had. This is really what we were hoping for. And if it hits 52 countries, because it's, you know, WHO Europe is a lot bigger, that's also fine, because there are no borders, right? Well, there shouldn't be, as we learned during COVID. And for us, really, the priority is getting each piece of the chain that goes from the producers of the medicine to the patient to align so that the slide works. And that means that everybody has to give something. And that can only be done in a discussion, not in our own offices sitting behind our screens or even in our own meeting rooms. And so what you're doing, convening, however difficult it is, because you have so many different views, but the good news is that the patient is at the center, so the objective is the same. And at the end of the day, if you can just get those bits of the slide to align, I'm convinced that we can do much better than we're doing today.
Okay, very nice and positive.
I see myself having to continue Nathalie's thought, because involving patients is really what is really, I mean, the reason of existence of the European Patients Forum. So, you know, I have to talk about it. I think the priority as your multi-stakeholder discussion continues, and I know we were there in the last couple of days. When we are talking about indicators, and when we are talking in general about medicinal products, it is no longer the case that the patient voice is too inexperienced or too naive to contribute. I think the patient communities have developed a significant amount of maturity, expertise in their conditions, and increasingly in healthcare system issues, that we can contribute meaningfully to the discussions that go beyond the very simple impact. And I do have to say, I really like the development of patient experience data, patient outcomes, patient-reported information. And that must bring me into discussing the involvement of patients in defining what are unmet needs in healthcare and what are unmet needs beyond the medical and the clinical endpoints.
Okay, MP Weiss, you also want to...
I just want to welcome the possibility and the invitation, but also the competences that lies in WHO. And I would like to ask of us as Europeans that we always remember the double movement around the treaty that is somehow the legal framework of what we as a community in Brussels can do and what the member states and the municipalities do. Sometimes I miss the facilitator, the clever, the competent facilitator who can help us to understand the prisms when we see either on a specific diagnosis group or a specific country or a specific region. What can others learn from looking at that? No one can learn the same because everybody has its own complexity. And this cross-pollinator in how to understand what is really also the governance innovation that can be harvested or nurtured. I really think that the situation we are having right now in Europe and globally, that learnings from the pandemic make us sometimes long back to the pandemic because then everything went so fast and there was so much fast track and sandboxing, but that also came with the cost that we can't afford in normal times. So what else can we do? And there is what I really think that the toolbox of WHO could actually maybe also help us Europeans in the EU institutions not to fall in the trap of again having this unfruitful debate about whose responsibility. I mean, yeah, so please bring it on.
Bring it on indeed. Anyone else with a question? Oh, there we go. Yeah, and the gentleman at the back as well, then I guess. Yeah.
Natalia Harashkiewicz-Birkemeyer, Biopharma First Consultancy. I have two questions. So, first of all, the discussion went about the attractiveness of Europe on the global scene of healthcare. So, my question is, what other countries are doing differently from Europe? So why the US now is, let's say, more competitive in comparison to Europe? Can we learn something from them, let's say? And then the second question, in fact, which kind of incentives would facilitate the faster progress and investments in healthcare? And here I have in mind small, medium enterprises, so looking from their perspective, as well as large pharma. Thank you.
Who's your question to?
They are just general questions, so yeah, who feels can take the subject?
I can take
the
last one.
Sure, yeah.
And what really is good in the proposal from the Commission, and that's in the regulation, so it's not so directly in my hands, although I have put some amendments on it.
So the socialist did something right then.
That is the regulatory sandbox. That is how we can really foster from going from the universities, the labs, the radical innovation suddenly happening because of research, and then moving it because it's a novelty. Through the sandbox into the incubator of how to grow it as an entrepreneur, a small, very small scale company to something that creates a unicorn in Europe. And if we can make the sandboxes as proposed, or maybe with a twist from the Commission side, work in pharma, then actually also other industries in Europe would gain from that design of a sandbox. So I really, really, really hope that also colleague industries to the pharma sector is echoing, yes, let's try to do it, because right now there is actually a very, very good proposal that is it's not just a free of rules playground. It is a sandbox with some restrictions and criteria. So yeah, that's one of the very good things that echoes your second question. Thank you.
maybe more broadly, I mean, the issues of innovation depends on a lot of things. The environment in which there is, the ecosystem, is not just a matter of the profitability, if you want, of an industry. It's really like the research that is behind and so forth. So I think it's fundamental, obviously, that when looking at any industry, to consider the entire ecosystem, starting from the basic research and the kind of incentives and encouragement to have that sound basic research, going down to all the industry pipeline. But I think there is also a broader issues of in Europe, which I think does pretty well, to try to look at both access, which has to do necessarily also to issues about pricing and about regulations of access, and innovations. And I think that's really finding that balance is not a particularly easy one, but I think it's something that definitely it's at the core really of Europe, trying really to encourage, on the one hand, having innovations, and probably the industry will be in disagreement here, but also facilitating and making sure that there is the access. The last issue is, for me, that we talk about innovation, but there is a big difference between an innovative medicine and a novel medicine, for example, or an innovative product and a novel product. And so novel products or novel medicines, are things which are, produced, but that don't fundamentally address an unmet needs or produce a fundamental really change for patients. And I think we need probably to think much more about how do we create the sort of mechanism, incentives and approaches that really encourage that truly innovation rather than just the novelty of new products.
Okay, gentleman at the back, I think you had a question. Yep, go ahead. You can shout if you like. Go for it.
I have a rather disruptive question.
Perfect, we love those. Go for it.
Okay. Some say that the pandemic is over. Is it? I have received many publications, Japanese studies, Korean studies, and other studies. I mean, the consequences of vaccination are somewhat concerning. Increased numbers of myocarditis, increased number of cancers, decreased immune system. This is more or less related to the COVID vaccine. So I'm wondering, is the pandemic really over? I don't think so.
Massimo, would you love to answer that question?
Thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
This way, right?
Who's had the Pfizer vaccine? Put your hands up.
So,
please go ahead.
Clearly, there are some. The end of the pandemic has been stated not by the industry, but has been stated by health bodies and institutions. So it's not the industry saying that is the end or the beginning of whatever. As far as the real content of your question, if I got it right, I guess I think that we need all of us need to go back to real evidence. Is there such an evidence of the connection that you are referring to? I don't know if there is evidence or not. I guess I'm not familiar with that. The pandemic is still going on because of the reason that you mentioned. So,
I'll send you here.
Okay, fine. But I think that as long as there is evidence, I think that the right authorities are going to maybe change their position. Clearly, it's not a call for the industry to do that.
Would you like to comment? Yeah. Who wants to comment?
It could be. The answer could be disruptive, and we don't rule that out as a possibility. But while we are focusing on that, I would like us not to forget the resistance on antimicrobials, and we haven't talked about that. So maybe that could be another opportunity because how are the incentives for how to develop antibiotics that we don't use? So the vouchers. It's right now. I see the discussion in the House that either you are pro or you are con the vouchers, and I simply think that there is something in between because we want to work with more carrots in the market of research and development for the future. And there I missed that the 10th most dangerous health threat for the whole globe, which is the antimicrobial resistance, gets a more intention. And right now it's very much in the hands of the member states. Hopefully the discussion on the vouchers, if they can do a trick or not, can urge some member states to step up in research and development in how to combat antimicrobial resistance that is not only covered by one fixed medication. It's so much more complex. So I wouldn't, I welcome evidence on maybe we are still in a pandemic, but I would really like that we have just as much attention now on antimicrobial resistance, please.
Nicely said. We are now 19, 20 seconds, 21 seconds over, so I will close the debate here. Please do enjoy your coffee. We will be back after those 15 minutes with the second panel. Thank you, everyone.